So today we welcome a serial entrepreneur and a best-selling author, Ashley Wilson. Not only has she been a part of over $165 million of real estate investments across 1,500 units, she's also founded a coaching and mentorship platform for other operators and investors, which is why we're especially excited to speak with her today. Ashley, welcome to The Build Up.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, and we're very excited to talk to you today. We have a lot to chat about, but, we want to go back to the beginning. We know you started your career path in pharma, right? So we want to understand a little bit more about not just the why, but the how you pivoted from, corporate America to real estate investing.
So you're absolutely correct. I did start in pharma. I started in clinical R&D. I worked on global vaccine trials that were pre-regulatory approval. So we would run clinical trials throughout the world, testing different vaccines, and then we would hope that we would be submitting them to regulatory authorities, getting approvals, and bringing new vaccines to the world. In that process, my husband and I both were looking for ways that we could invest. And we were not the traditional stock market investors. We really thought there must be a better avenue to investing. And we stumbled across real estate. So in 2007, we started listening and really being active in the Bigger Pockets community. And that hooked us onto real estate, especially reading the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which most people get turned on to real estate by Robert Kiyosaki's book. From there, we decided that we were going to invest in real estate, and we started by doing it alongside of our careers. The first investment we invested in was in a house hack / Airbnb. My husband used to be a professional athlete, so we bought a property that was where he was playing. During the season, we rented other rooms to his teammates. And then during the off season, we would short-term rent the property. And that was very, very lucrative and very easy. This was in a time before technology integrated with real estate, but we were still able to automate a lot of the systems to make it very lucrative for us, which turned us on to real estate even more. Quickly after that, we bought a few other short-term and long-term properties, and we were continuing to work within our career. But it was only after my husband's career took us overseas that I decided that I wanted to leave pharma. When I left pharma and was living overseas, I was so bored. And, especially being someone who is very, very driven naturally, I turned to my husband and I said, we didn't want to go full into real estate until you were done your career. But at the same time, it'd be really great if we built up a business that hopefully could replace your income once you stop playing, so that we can just have a seamless transition. In the NHL at the time, they had over a 75% divorce rate after the players were done playing. And the number one reason was a change in financial status. I didn't want to be another statistic. So we agreed that we were going to start investing in real estate more actively. So I started a high-end flipping business with my father. My dad has had his own general contracting business for over 45 years. So it was a natural fit. And you might think, well, what could Ashley have done from Europe back in 2014? And it's surprising, but I could do almost everything. I could find the property, I could analyze the property, I could do design, I could hire contractors, I could schedule contractors, I could order materials, I could do marketing for selling the property. And my dad was boots on the ground. He ensured that the contractor showed up and he ensured that the work was being done according to plan. So we continued on doing high-end flipping up until 2021. But when my husband retired in 2017, we always knew we wanted to get into commercial real estate. So we transitioned into commercial real estate in Q1 of 2018, and then since have built Bar Down Investments, which is our investment firm. And that's what we use to offer passive investments to people who want to own real estate, but maybe have another career or interest that they don't want to do the day-to-day operations. So that's really what changed for us and kind of the steps in the process on how it came to fruition.
Yes, thank you so much for explaining that process, because there's a lot in there, and we're going to get into kind of each of those aspects that you brought up. But I think one of the most important things is getting started. You know, fear is the number one reason why people don't invest in real estate. So in the very beginning, you know, as you and your husband were, you know, educating yourselves on real estate investing, can you recall some of the specific fears that you had? You know, maybe some were self-limiting beliefs or just anxiety towards making this big step, especially financial steps. So do you remember what some of those were? And if you do, you know, how were you able to overcome them and ultimately get started?
Great question. We educated ourselves on real estate for, if you look back, for about 2 years, a little less than 2 years, but really for 2 years. And we armed ourselves with the knowledge. And then we also armed ourselves with the financial capabilities to be able to invest. That is hands down the number one reason that my growth trajectory isn't even stronger and I'm not further along. I had such a limiting belief that my financial position in terms of how much cash I on hand was indicative of how much potential I had to grow in real estate. Specifically, we bought our first property in cash. Looking back on that situation, if there's one thing that I would recreate or redo that would have put me on a much stronger trajectory, is if I had never had access to capital. I actually didn't learn how to raise capital until 2018. So well into my real estate journey, about a decade later. That's a huge deficit because I limited our growth off of how much money we had. And that was a huge fear of getting started. Not only the down payment of finding a house, but what if something goes wrong? What about the reserves? What about those unexpected expenses? And I had the advantage of growing up in construction. So even with having that advantage, I still had that financial fear. And when I look back on it, literally the most abundant resource we have is money. They're literally printing it every single day. They are not printing land. So if you want to talk about what is a scarce resource, which is land and the properties themselves, and if you think about it that way, and if you look at the fact that our population growth is rising, but the land is not increasing, then values obviously will over the long term will rise in theory, right? But the capital resources are abundant. There are a lot of different avenues that you can access capital, and that was my greatest fear. So I think if anyone's listening and have additional fears in terms of other resources, just know that there are so many opportunities out there to tap into other experts in the field and leverage their resource, whether it's capital, whether it's construction knowledge, whether it's underwriting on projections, whether it's sourcing properties or investments through any means, through brokers or off market. There's always an expert in some arena. You just have to be open to finding them and be willing to take the action of identifying them.
Of course.
Well said.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more. I think, just because we have this podcast and we have people like you on here, right, to really encourage people who are listening, because everyone starts from a place of fear, I think, especially when it's such a big take on, right? You're taking on something huge, and especially also if you don't have expertise in that field. So definitely that was great advice, but you've come a far way from that, right? Like you have multiple businesses. You've established HouseItLook, which is your flipping business, as well as Bar Down Investment, where, you advise, right? But we kind of want to talk about a little bit more about your multifamily portfolio. So what was the catalyst to really get you to expand into multifamilies?
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. We work with Brown Harris Stevens and many other top real estate firms, staging their homes to sell quickly and at the highest price possible. Our staging is affordable without sacrificing quality or design. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
The difference between flipping and multifamily, said very succinctly, is that one is you've created yourself another job, and two is you've created a pathway in which you can tap into financial freedom. You can use house flipping to get to financial freedom, but it typically involves using your gains and reinvesting them in some sort of other tax advantage strategy. I'll first give the disclaimer that I am not a certified public accountant. You should confirm everything that I'm about to say with someone who is not only a CPA, but is a real estate focused CPA. Always say that no matter where I'm talking or when I'm talking, the best thing you can ever take away from whatever I'm saying is to align yourself with an expert in real estate as a CPA. You want someone like that in your corner because really the tax codes are the rules to life. It's the way people become financially free, and you need someone who's able to interpret them because they're constantly evolving and they're highly complicated. So when you look at the advantages commercial real estate provides, it provides so many tax advantages with respect to doing cost segregation. So it's essentially a way that you can capitalize on having a paper loss. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have an actual loss, but on paper, you can have a paper loss that essentially defers your taxes. It doesn't eliminate them, but it defers them. So that's a strategy you can tap into. You can also tap into leverage with commercial real estate, and you can do so within flipping and residential real estate. But the difference is that you're doing it on a grander scale. So in terms of appreciation, as properties appreciate, I would rather have $1 million property appreciate 2% than a $100,000 property appreciate 2% because the debt remains constant, but you get to participate in the appreciation of the debt. So whatever the value of the property is that is offset by the debt, you're able to tap into that added equity. When it gets to offering passive investment opportunities for owning multifamily, we like to say there's 7 different ways that you can be paid, and it is through mortgage pay down, appreciation, and fees. So that's another way that you can make it a business. It's easier to scale. It's easier to find experts and be able to offset their expense and have them come on as employees from day one, as opposed to building up a residential business. It takes a little bit longer. By no means am I trying to say that you can't be successful at both. I've seen people successful in both. And that's the beauty of real estate, is you can be successful at anything. The challenge is staying focused, and the challenge is finding something that aligns with who you are and what you want to achieve. If this isn't for you, if you don't need passive income, or if you don't want to tap into commercial real estate, you can build a very successful residential real estate or high-end flipping or just regular flipping and take some of your gains and passively invest in other arenas. And that will allow you to benefit from both. And I know a lot of people who do that. So I want to be just very clear, because I never like saying that there's an absolute and there's only one way to be successful. There are multiple ways that someone can be successful.
We couldn't agree more, and that's also part of, the show, the build up, is to not only, expose what best practices, but the different types of real estate strategies that different investors utilize, because one size definitely doesn't fit all. It depends on so many factors which one will work, and we'll talk about that a bit more. But, one thing we want to talk about in regard to your multifamily business is risk, and how do you go about mitigating risk to the extent possible when it comes to your investment process?
We are so conservative, like to a default. So, or to a fault, excuse me, to a fault. And I think it really comes down to aligning yourself with someone that you are on the same page with risk. So when we talk about the different reasons someone gets into investing and what they're looking for, there are folks that fall into the bucket of capital preservation. There are folks that fall into the bucket of wealth building. And there are folks who fall into the bucket of tax advantages. And then there's obviously people on all spectrums where they want a little bit of each, and depending on where they are in their life, they might want more capital preservation than they need tax benefits, right? So there's a continuum there. But I think that when you're looking at how to mitigate that risk, you need to align yourself with someone who is investing or offering investment opportunities that fit your profile. So for us, when we're offering investments, we actually have a few different vehicles that we offer to our investors. So it's not a one size fits all approach. We have investment offerings where it's for folks who are really in a wealth building mindset. They're willing to take on additional risk for the upside of a higher return at the end when we sell the property. There are other folks though who don't want that risk. They'd rather have mailbox money. They'd rather have that check come in monthly, have confidence. They don't mind foregoing the upside as long as they have a stable investment. Obviously, no investment is a guarantee, but it really depends on how you structure the investment, on where you can mitigate risk, right? So you can have an investment that is considered a value add where you're repositioning the investment. And overall, as an investment, that's maybe more on the riskier side if you're looking at it in terms of a scale. But the product that you can offer to investors is, let's say, a pref equity position. And that pref equity position allows it to be a less risky venture, because one of the products we offer, for example, is you don't get to participate in the upside, but what you do get is you get to be paid right after the bank. So your payment comes right after the bank. And then upon sale, not only does your initial investment get returned first after the bank gets paid off, but you get your profits up to a ceiling before all other common equity or other investors get their original investment back. That provides security, because obviously the investment would have to lose a certain percentage for it to even impact your original investment. So that comes with some security attached to it, even though the investment is a little bit maybe more risky in terms of being a value add. If you build teams that are aligned with you in terms of thinking in that manner, which our team is definitely very aligned in figuring out how much risk we're willing to stomach, how much risk we're not willing to stomach, then it becomes an easier day-to-day process, because you are hyper-focused on exactly what you do well. And that's what you have to find when you're looking for someone to passively invest with, is making sure that you're aligned with what your overall company vision and plan is, and the product that you're investing in fits that criteria.
Right. I mean, how do you find those people though, right, for you to be aligned with? What is that process like for you?
So for us personally, because we're active investors, we have a very thorough vetting process of coming onto our team, and we ensure that anyone who is in a position where they are making or influencing buying decisions and operating decisions is understanding of where we're at as a company, what we're trying to accomplish overall, and they buy into that vision and they partake in taking steps to implement that vision. So it's a very thorough vetting process when it comes to hiring. If I'm looking for someone to passively invest with, because I also passively invest as well, it's not that I only invest in my investments. Not only do I invest in real estate, I'm a part owner of a rum company, I'm involved in multiple tech companies as an investor, and a whole plethora of other things. And how do I vet those groups? Well, number one, when I look at a something that I'm interested in investing in, I look at the people. So how do I even find out about the investment in the first place? Normally it's a referral. Normally I'm not getting cold emailed by some group. And if I was getting cold email, trust me, my vetting process would be even more thorough because now I don't know anything about this investment. But most of the time, my investment offerings come through some other acquaintance. And I get presented an investment offering. And the number one thing that I do is I vet the team. I really understand their expertise and I understand the inner workings between them. I am not typically someone who would invest in an alcohol company. That is not my profile. But when I looked at the makeup of the team, what I really loved about the team, and this is something that anyone could do today, literally right after listening to this, is educate yourself on how businesses become successful. And they become successful because not only do you have different skill sets of people operating them, but you have an autonomy and a respect for your colleagues, right? So if anyone's ever read the book Traction, there is this concept of having a visionary and an integrator. And this rum company not only had that, but then they had all the supporting people around it. So when I talked to the group on a group call and got access to all of these folks, I saw how they presented even together. Was it one person who presented the entire time for the company? Yes, that's great from an ease of listening to. But in terms of understanding someone's expertise and how they work together and how they complement each other when they talk, not like compliment, oh, this person's so great, but in terms of adding value to something that is already been said. So I really look at the psychology behind a group to understand, first of all, how are they able to work together? Are they able to work together? Do they bring different expertise into the field that is of value of growing this company? Then I look at the market in which they're operating. I look at, is there a deficit in this market? Are they going to be able to provide value? You know, when we look at value add properties, is there a deficit when it comes to safe, nice housing for X type of tenant in this market? So I look at the market underlying fundamentals and I look at the risks associated with it, natural disaster risks, etc. The very last thing I look at is the product itself. So people like to look at the returns first and be juiced up on the returns and ignore everything else. And I can tell you firsthand that I have countlessly seen situations where you have a terrible team with an incredible product, incredible offering, and it's a failure. And I've seen the flip side where I've seen an incredible team and a really challenging offering or product, and they've made that incredible. They've been able to squeeze as much juice out of that lemon as possible. And it's because of two underlying variables. And that's one, the team, and two, the market in which they operate that they know they can exploit. So I use that process. It's a very thorough process on which I vet and make sure. Now, I know that there's no guarantee. So regardless of how thorough my process is, there's always a risk for being in an investment that doesn't pan out. You should never invest with anyone if this is the only money you have to invest. First, it's not good to ever think in investment, I'm going to make this. It's better to think, I'm okay with losing all of this money. That's how you should go into an investment. So
it's like gambling.
$50,000 to invest, you should say, I will totally be fine if I lose $50,000. I will not lose my house. I will not ruin my marriage. I will not be able to put food on the table for my family by losing this $50,000. So that's how I think that you should invest.
That's a great perspective. And definitely thank you for sharing that. That's a great process. I think a lot of listeners who are tuning in, you know, they'll find a lot of value there. But switching gears a little bit, I mean, you're so dynamic. You have so much going on. You have so many other businesses and different platforms. But you also wrote a best-selling book. Like, if all of that is not enough, right? The Only Woman in the Room, and the title itself is very telling. But talk to us about what inspired you to write that book.
I was attending a conference in Philadelphia. There were 450 people in attendance, and the co-founders of the real estate investor community had asked every woman in attendance to have lunch together. We squeezed 2 tables together, and 16 of us had lunch together. Backstory, I attended an all-boys school. Sophomore year, it switched to being co-ed, and it was over 3-to-1 odds. It was like 3.5 to 1 boys to girls. I lived my senior year in college with 14 other boys. I went into commercial real estate. I was in flipping. I was in construction. I have always been the only woman in the room, but the only time it hit me in the face was at this lunch. I had never realized it until then. And you know how movies say like it was like that aha moment and there's like this music. It was an out of body experience where I felt like I was, everyone's having conversations and I'm looking around the room saying to myself, how are there only 16 women here? I couldn't even believe it. My husband and I drove home from that conference that night, and I said to him, and I still remember, we were driving in a Jeep Wrangler and it was the middle of winter. And I said to him, I am going to write a book called The Only Woman in the Room. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm going to write this book. I feel just called to write this book. And the next year I spent secretively interviewing women. They didn't know I was interviewing them for the book. And I interviewed all these women to understand their story, to understand whether or not they'd be giving of information on how they were able to achieve success. And ultimately, I selected 19 other women to co-author the book with me. And my goal was that any single person, male or female, that picked up the book could relate to at least one person in the book. So it was really important for me to provide this diverse landscape. And one of the reasons that I figured out that the book was the correct platform is I realized that all of these conferences, majority of the time, the only time there's a woman speaker is on a panel. It's rarely a keynote, but all keynotes have a book behind their name. So I figured, okay, well, if 19 other women have a book behind their name and I was compelled to make it a bestseller, then all of a sudden you have 19 women now to select from to be keynote speakers who should have been keynote speakers before, but this is like, the nail in the coffin. You have to have this woman be a keynote. So that was, the story behind The Only Woman in the Room.
I love that.
Same here. And, we haven't yet had a chance to read it, but we're very excited to read it and relate to the many stories that, are in that book. And I read a stat that only 31% of real estate investors are female. So it's not a lot of the investors out there. What do you think needs to change in order for there to be greater representation of women in real estate investing?
Well, that is a great question. And it's actually a great segue on something that I recently launched. So in February, I launched a site called conferenceconnect.com. And what it is this speaker and conference discovery platform. And what it allows is for speakers to create a free profile, showcase their expertise, events they've spoken at before, highlight books, highlight their social media following, etc., and allows event organizers to search for these folks by topic and recruit them to speak at their conference. And it just fits so perfectly into my overall mission of bringing more diversity to stage. So I'm a firm believer that if you provide an opportunity, most people will take action once they see the opportunity and a roadmap in front of them. I think in part what's happening is not only do we have an industry that is lacking in diversity, but the entry point into these different arenas is typically through conferences and educational platforms. And those platforms, for lack of a better word, are limited on diversity. So they attract what they already have in there. We need more diversity on stage. We need more diversity on educational platforms. to be able to show that it's possible for any person, anyone who has a dream for financial future, that they can achieve it because they are mirroring someone who has already done it. And it's all about just providing a spotlight and a platform, because there are women doing it. There are, even 30%. I can tell you that there's not even 30% of women on stage at real estate conferences. So it's not even reflective of what's happening in the industry. So we need more diversity to just be able to speak and be a role model and then attract their audiences. And I think what will happen is an echo chamber. I think if you look at, there's two groups of people, right, that are in real estate, men and women. There's only one group that's growing, and it's not men. Women are growing in this industry, so we should be doubling down and cheerleading for women to be able to have access to real estate and financial freedom. Ultimately, women outlive men 6 to 8 years on average. Pre-COVID, that translated into $286,000 to $316,000 of cost of living. That is not a problem that is shouldered just by women. It's a problem shouldered by family members, male or female, friends, family, colleagues, etc. So it's a global problem that we need to all kind of embrace and be able to provide these opportunities for people to have access to knowledge, financial literacy. And I'm a huge believer that if you look at generationally, women weren't given access to education. Then when they were given access to education, it was only limited. There's a huge push for STEM fields right now. And I think that's a catalyst for seeing more women enter the arena because they have a foundation of mathematics, accounting, financial literacy. And when you have a solid understanding of all of those aspects, then you have the confidence to invest.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't relate to you more. We're aligned in our mission. That's really what the buildup is about, right? Just getting that message out, and of course, empowering women for that, financial freedom. It's super important. And, we really admire all you've been doing, and you've accomplished so much already. But is there one more goal that you have that you're going to tackle next, or do you have your hands full? What is in the future for you?
Right now, I'm really focused on the companies we have and building and bringing awareness. I am a very fluid person. I like to kind of see what's going on the market and shift and adjust. And I'm a problem solver at heart, right? I love helping people. I love being able to have an impact and change the world. So if that looks different 5 years from now, I'm completely open to it. But for now, I think what my team and I are doing is filling up our bandwidth quite a bit.
It's more than enough. And yeah, we are going to follow your journey because we're very inspired by all you're doing, and, continue to keep, making an impact.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for being with us, Ashley. Like Malessa said, you really mirror everything that, we value, and that's why we're so glad to have you here and all of your amazing takeaways. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business, and it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
So that interview was really good. What were your thoughts?
I mean, she's very, very impressive. I loved her story of how she just started, small, working with her father, and really then was very driven and motivated because she, really scaled such a successful business from there. And, she wrote a book about, being the only woman in the room, obviously, and what it's like to be, to really put a spotlight on women's stories in our industry. And obviously, that's something we're both very passionate about. So naturally, I feel like we all really aligned there with a lot of similar values and work ethic. And so overall, overall, I mean, I'm just so glad that she joined us because I feel like I learned things, just listening to her.
Yeah, definitely. I think she was very empowering and she had a lot to say. I learned a lot and I admire her for what she's doing. But switching gear, we're going to be talking today about a topic that we've been talking multiple times now, affordable housing.
Or the lack thereof.
Exactly. And on next week's episode, we are going to be interviewing a guest who's in that sphere. So it'd be great to discuss this topic in general.
Yeah. I mean, a few weeks ago, we saw the Biden administration's new housing policies and what they're hopeful to begin to really put into motion. So what are your first thoughts on what they put forward?
Honestly, it's a mixed bag. They, on one hand, $100 million in funding to boost affordable housing production and streamline loan processes sounds very promising, right? It's great that they're trying to really tackle this problem. We've talked about it. And it is a real problem. There's a lack of affordable housing, just housing in general. But a lot of this really hinges on Congress. So that's the interesting part.
There's a lot that does require congressional approval to put into motion, but there's also others that do not. What really caught my attention, though, was the move towards allowing different types of housing, like duplexes and triplexes even. So that's going to really shake things up.
For sure. And with Kamala, she just announced that she's trying to build 3 million affordable housing, right? So it's clear that she's really focusing on housing in this upcoming election as a big part of her campaign. And it's really echoing what Biden has been trying to do, but I think with a little bit more ambition. How do you think that this will be, what impact do you think this will have?
I mean, of course, if this can actually get done, it's going to have huge implications. But what we have to be mindful of is that a lot of the new homes that are being built are not within the affordable price range. They're, not within that 100,000 to 300,000. A lot of the new homes right now are being catered toward the more affluent buyers because, of course, with higher costs and higher interest rates, you need that higher price point to get the margin as a builder. So that's something that we have to be mindful of. So that's leaving first-time home buyers in a really tough spot.
And that's what we've been talking about from, day one of this podcast. It's just really the first-time home buyers. They're suffering most, and usually it's millennials and Gen Z. And that's really the problem, right? I think a lot of times we're seeing, even with these new policies, they're just really catering to that really high-end buyer. And again, like you said, leaving that first-time home buyer out of the equation of owning a home. The administration focus on landlords needs to be really heightened because, again, we're seeing landlords are raising up rents, especially for people who can't afford it.
Right. And this is, of course, exacerbating our homelessness problem here in the U.S. And so the National Alliance to End Homelessness is really pushing for some new policies to include more universal approaches like housing vouchers and emergency rental assistance. And with homelessness being at an all-time high, these new policies are more important than ever.
Absolutely. But on the bright side, we've been hearing about some rate cuts potentially. So that will give a lot of relief to especially first-time home buyers or people who can't really afford that $1 million house that we were talking about. So and it's also a double-edged sword because now, with the higher interest rate, we've seen the market cooled. So now with these lower interest rates, we're hoping to see, buyers getting back out there and they can actually be able to afford these homes.
Of course. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of potential, but also a lot of uncertainty. So, with any time there's going to be an election year, it's really important to watch and see, what policies are ultimately implemented. And obviously there's a long, term ahead of us to see. I think ultimately, though, for the individual consumer in an election year, I mean, regardless of what changes are put into place, it's not going to have as much of an impact on them as it will on investors and on builders because they're more sensitive to, tax incentives, to, the caps on raising rents because suddenly now these deals just don't make sense. And so that's the profile of the type of, real estate owner that's going to be more affected than your individual buyer because the idea with home ownership should be, more of a long-term investment. And so you may own the home for multiple different, presidency cycles. So, of course it has an impact, but really the greater impact with a lot of these policy changes is going to be on our developers, our builders, and on our investors. So that's really what we have to pay more attention to.
Exactly. And I think for your individual home buyers, especially the affordable home buyer, I think they're the ones who are more sensitive to things like interest rates, right? So those are the things that they should be more focused on versus these policies, because as you know, every everyone's going to say what they want to say during an election year as part of their campaign. And even like we said, previously in this conversation, even if we do have these policies try to be implemented, it still has to go through Congress, right? So it's not an immediate sort of
relief.
Fix. Yeah, exactly. But it's more of like a long-term look at it. So like Greg said on this podcast before, you sort of, marry the house, date the rate, right? So that's the kind of approach I think first-time home buyers or just home buyers in general should be looking at it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully no matter who gets in office, they're very, pro pro real estate and pro affordable housing, which,
it's a problem.
Yeah.
It's a real problem in the country. So I think they have to tackle it somewhere or the other.
No matter who gets in, it's something that it needs to be addressed. And obviously we will be watching that closely because it's a super important topic.
Exactly. This episode is presented by Brown Harris Stevens. For more insight on real estate, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment.
We'll see you next time. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice.
For specific recommendations, please consult with your financial, legal, or tax professional.
Your phone or always leaves your text on red? Leaves your text on red.
Built the corporate group with $1,000 loan.
Tell us a little bit about how you actually came from.
Welcome to the build-up genre.
Thanks for having me.
We're coming to you here from Studio 1873.
It's not 57% over $2.7 million.
So then, it's just